A little bit about the project. The gist of it is to repatriate the prosthetic leg of General Santa Anna, who lost his leg during a battle in the Mexican-American War. And ever since the 1800s, his prosthetic leg has been kept in the Illinois State Military Museum.
You look at a Texas history textbook, again, for like a middle school Texas history class, and there's maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs on Mexican-American culture, on the Mexican-American War, on Santa Anna. And the one sentence that may appear about Santa Anna is, he was a dictator, he murdered people, he was bad, the end. And there's really no other side of that story.
The Texas education system not only showed Santa Anna in a negative light, but it also showed the Mexican soldiers and Mexico as a whole in a negative light during the Texas Revolution.
As a Latina and as a Mexican American who has family from Mexico, and the culture is really important to me, and so growing up in this system of learning Manifest Destiny and being taught that Manifest Destiny was this like big important thing, and if you didn't believe in it, like you weren't patriotic, you didn't have this nationalistic view of the country that you lived in.
I initially didn't even know that he had a prosthetic leg. I didn't know that at first.
And all of a sudden, one of my students, who was actually older, he was 30, he said, "My ancestor is Santana." And I stood there and I said, "Hey, well, Grandpa's leg is in Illinois, man." "What? Let's go get it."
I think objects allow us to do is question who we are and what these objects were, so we can start to talk about the history behind them and to become curious. So for example, if we're looking at Santa Anna's leg, my first question is, what the heck is a wooden leg doing here? Why is it shaped the way it's shaped? What was it used for? Who used it?
Okay, like it's just a piece of wood. It's just a prosthetic leg. There's nothing to it. There's nothing exciting about it. And that's the way I thought about it for the project.
After everything that they had heard about how hating Santana works to sustain a racial hierarchy in Texas where they're at the bottom, this idea of rescuing Santana's leg, of defending Santana in Mexico, suddenly had all the energy of people who had already been learning for by then 8, 10, 12 years that they bore the sin, the original sin of Santana. This notion of the phantom limb, this notion that Mexico still remembers and mourns or feels the loss, suffers the loss of its amputated body parts. I do find that compelling. The people in this land, the people who are my students, who went on that trip, they are orphaned. Mexico doesn't love them, doesn't remember them. Here lately, the post-Trump world where Mexicans are being so hated, there's been a little bit of a warmer attitude toward Mexican Americans, but they've been orphaned by Mexico, and they certainly were never embraced by the U.S. So it's not just the territories that Mexico misses. For my students and my sons, it is this sense of being orphaned. So for Mexico, it's a phantom limb. You miss the land. For us, it's much worse. It's a festering wound that needs to be healed. And that's why 25 kids, 18 of whom were Mexican American, got on a bus, traveled 18 hours, 19 hours without stopping.
The trip to me was a wonderful experience. Not only did I get to travel to a new state and city that I've never been to, but it was just all of the history behind it. All of Abraham Lincoln. And when we think about Abraham Lincoln, we think of the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation, a lot of those things that were done during his presidency. But the thing that not a lot of people focus on or really shed light to is what he did as a legislator. And a lot of that revolved around the Mexican-American War.
That's what Abraham Lincoln says. Americans, we've killed our brothers like Cain killed Abel.
If Lincoln was still alive today, we truly feel, and at least I certainly do, feel that Abraham Lincoln would want to repatriate the leg. But it's also because it's a sign of respect to another person. I mean, to really fetishize somebody's prosthetic leg it's not right.
Into perspective of like this was someone's, I mean obviously someone's property, but beyond that, like literally someone's body. And I don't know, I guess when you put it into the context of today, it's like you know, how would we feel if our soldiers' body parts were kept overseas for, I don't know, the sake of show, the sake of showing off.
The week before we were going to go, we learned that they had taken the leg off of display. And so we all saw that as they took it off display because they knew we were coming. And so when we got there, they had it set out in a box. It was roped off, which isn't how it would have been displayed were it in the museum. I think it was just because that's why we were there.
When we arrived to the Illinois State Military Museum, we felt very unwelcomed. As soon as we walked through the doors, there was lots of tension, and we could feel it. It was just among the atmosphere. It was just there.
Beyond whether or not we're ever able to repatriate the leg, just the project in general, like I mentioned earlier, starting these conversations and getting into these discussions of, you know, this is what you were told, but maybe that's not exactly how it happened, or maybe those aren't necessarily the full sides of every story, I think is something that could definitely help to reshape what an official history looks like.
My entire life, I was always pro-American, America, 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 and that's simply because of the things I learned in school, and I didn't have critical thinking until really high school and to college. I think with the trip really just allows me to appreciate who I am as a Mexican American, and I can emphasize that of both. I'm not all American and I'm not all Mexican. I'm in between, and I think the trip has just really allowed me to see that and understand that and not be afraid to fight for either one, simply because they're a part of me. And in order to truly accept who I am, I have to truly accept what those two things are in my life.
But it's also a plea to Mexicans to receive the leg, because they have also been tricked. Mexicans have been tricked into hating Santa Anna, because in the post-intervención, you know, that was a civil war. So how do you heal a civil war? Well, you find a bad guy and then everybody else rallies together and they ignore their own things. And by doing so, Mexicans are playing into the hands of Texans. It's like, see, Mexicans hate him too. So we get to hate him. And if we hate him, it spills over into us hating you. So Mexicans are helping Texans hate Mexican Americans when they hate Santa Anna. They're complicit.
You want to see my socks? That's awesome, right? Where did you get them? Online.